Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the latest episode of Cannabis Unlocked. I'm very excited to be joined today by my friend Chuck Smith, the founder and former CEO of Bellrock Brands. Chuck, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great, Jordan, and I'm really happy to be here with you. Thanks so much for inviting me on the podcast.
Absolutely. I'm really excited to have you on the podcast, to have gotten to know you over the years as a friend and colleague, and to also benefit from your vast experience in the wild world of cannabis.
It is a wild world, but a fun one still.
Yeah, so why don't we kick things off with the beginning? What was your first foray into the cannabis space and how did you decide to get involved?
Yeah, that's a fun legacy story, I guess. It was really, I'll call it fate, and just a little bit of happenstance. I had a real estate development company. I was actually in Alabama, of all places, where I was living. I had moved there to build this company. And I had a business partner who many people in the industry know. His name's Trip Kieber. And this was well before cannabis. So we were both working in this real estate development company that I put together. And one day, a friend of mine in Alabama called me up and said, "Hey, I have a sister who lives in Denver, and this is back in 2009. So my sister lives in Denver, and she's making this infused tea, and she's got like a tiger by the tail, and but she needs some business mentoring. Do you think you might talk to her?" I'm like, "I don't know much about tea. What's it infused with?" She's like, "Cannabis." I'm like, okay, that I don't even understand that, right? Because back in 2009, I'm living in Alabama. I haven't smoked weed for a long time since I was in college, so I didn't even have my head around it. But I said, "Sure, I'll meet." And later that day, Trip calls me up and said, "Hey, somebody just sent me a deck to invest in a company, this cultivation company. I think we should look at it." And I'm like, "Cultivating what?" "Cannabis." I'm like, all right, the fate is aligning here. In the same day, I'm getting two cannabis calls, and I haven't had one since I was in college. So, long story short, we went and viewed the properties and viewed the opportunity, and we decided to invest in the cannabis tea company. And we were really, frankly, just going to be passive investors, giving her and her team some money and some guidance. But as I like to say, unfortunately, passive becomes active around the third check you write. So we very quickly became active, and that is how Dixie Elixirs and Edibles was born.
Wow, that's really exciting. So tell me about what the growth story was like for Dixie's Elixirs and Edibles as you got more actively involved.
Right. So it was, we were still kind of caregiver model back then in medical, but we could see the waves moving toward, what eventually was Amendment 64. So that was exciting. And for Tripp and myself, it was really to look at it as a business, understanding the complexity of it being a highly regulated and some effect, certainly federally illegal and in some effect illegal business. So we really just focused on standard operating procedures, trying to build the best team. We knew we were building food products. So we really had to have high compliance in terms of safety and quality and how we built and developed those formulas and packaged those food products. And again, this is back 2010, 2011, early days before there were a lot of the more stringent compliance issues that we and regulatory issues that we have now and structures. So I think we were, I think we'll take some credit for helping define some of those things too, because we were on the forefront of packaging and, quality testing and all those kind of things that you really need to do to build that kind of product. And a fun story, just as a little divergence, but when we had to brand the company, we didn't have any money, but other than what we put into it. So we went to a friend of Tripp's who owned a ad agency, and she agreed to help us do a whole brand redo and build, in essence, now what is the iconic logo of Dixie. And the person that ran that for her was Joe Hodis, of all
Oh,
people.
wow.
And Joe then came to work for us as our head of marketing. And then, of course, Joe's a great friend, and his rise in the industry now as the president and CEO of WANA is, amazing. But
Yeah.
that's how Joe got in the industry, was through us.
I love it. Well, Joe's an absolute rock star. He's been on the podcast as well in the past. So I'm glad that there's such a great continuity of leadership in the cannabis edible space.
Yeah, yeah. No, it was fun. So, with that, once we had a brand and once we had product and once we understood what, started to understand what patients and then ultimately consumers wanted, then we just built the team. And we
Yeah.
never really focused on being cultivators and certainly not dispensary owners, because we wanted to be a wholesale manufacturer of infused products and sell to everyone. And that's, what we ultimately built Dixie to be.
Wow. Well, then Dixie obviously had a pretty major transformation when you brought the company together with Mary's Medicinals and formed Bellrock Brands. So would love to hear a little bit of the story of how that came to be.
Sure. Well, even before the merger of the brands, we did take the company public. Tripp had decided to pursue some other endeavors. He was on the board for a bit, but I ended up taking over the CEO role, and then we took the company public in 2018. Frankly, Jordan, it was a decision I didn't want to do because the company was not big enough to really be a good, well operating public entity, even in Canada. The cost and complexity of that is so high. But as you're well aware, the capital markets were pretty closed. And so really that was the only way to raise any real money and have any real liquidity for investors, was to take the
Mhm.
company public. So we did that. We used that to really build Dixie Brands out. We used that to build our expansion and really built the company out over about from 2018 to 2020, about 8 states. Again, brand equity was very high. People really enjoyed the products and the consistency of the products. That was sort of our mantra. We wanted you to get on a plane in California, fly to Colorado, fly across the country to Maryland, and every time you bought a Dixie product, it tasted the same, it performed the same, it looked the same. And so that was really something we were really focused on. And we did that to great success. Then we needed to make a merger because, again, in this industry, again, as you well know, it's grow or die. And so we had to continue to grow and find ways to grow other than just, organic growth. And so we did a merger, a reverse merger with Mary's Medicinals,
Mhm.
another OG Colorado-based brand. So that was kind of fun to, because we basically started our companies at the same time. So to bring that onto the platform and then ultimately create Bellrock Brands was exciting. I did that. I orchestrated that deal, and then I stayed as the CEO through the integration. And then, just frankly, I was ready to step down from running on a day to day, give others the opportunity to do that. And today I remain on the board and help the company in any way I possibly can in what's a challenging industry right now. But the brands are still alive and well and selling across the country.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I agree. I mean, it's certainly been, as you mentioned, since that kind of 2018, 2019 timeframe when the public markets were looking attractive. It's been certainly a very challenging industry from a capital markets perspective, from a tax perspective. And so, being able to stay in the battle and be relevant as we're coming out of this downturn over the last couple of years, I think is a huge accomplishment. And I'd love to kind of double click on that. Experience you had, taking the company public in 2018, 2019, I think move a lot of cannabis businesses made at that time because, as you alluded to, it's really the only way to access capital at that point. The publics were going crazy on the heels of Constellation's huge investment in Canopy. So, I think it made sense for a lot of folks. However, as we've seen the cannabis publics contract over the last 5 years, with a small blip after the 2020 election, capital has really dried up for both publics and private. So I'd love to hear some of the trials and tribulations of operating a smaller public cannabis company, and how that maybe helped or hindered growth over the last few years for Bellrock.
Yeah, that's a great question. A lot to unpack in that one. Because I think there's arcs in time, right? When we first took the company public, I'll never forget it. It was right before Thanksgiving 2018. And we were, other than the public announcement and, some financials that were quite good in order to, take the company public and portray a viable public entity, there wasn't really anything that we were going to do for the balance of the year other than just operate the business. In fact, my wife and I went to Mexico because it was a long, struggling or long, complicated process to take the company public. And as a small company, it was just myself, CFO, and general counsel really carrying most of the weight. So I remember sitting on the beach in Mexico about midway through December, and fielding calls and doing that, but just trying to chill out. And that is when the short report for oh shucks, I can't remember the name of the company now, but there was a short report that came out, and it basically tanked all the stocks of the Canadian companies at the end of the year because there was the tax loss selling provision that the Canadians kind of all participate in December, and it just downdrafted everything. And so I'm literally sitting on the beach and watching the share price go, in half, and then fielding calls from investors. I'm like, I don't know, I'm having a margarita. Like, I didn't do anything. The company hasn't changed a bit in the last 2 weeks. And it was valued at that before this happened, and we have nothing to do with what happened. But all that to say, you just fight your way out of it because the stock price is really not necessarily a reflection of the company itself and the underlying assets, as I know you know. So we just, pulled up our big boy pants and kept going to work and, kept building the company and, built a lot of IP, created a lot of great relationships, and just continued to work our way through that like everybody else. I think, as I mentioned before, the challenge of being a public company is that the regulatory and compliance requirements for reporting are just very, very high. And, to be candid, we we had never missed a quarterly filing ever in the tenure of my role as the CEO with Dixie. But when we did the merger with Mary's, the books and records there weren't at the same level of compliance. Doesn't mean they were wrong. It just meant that they weren't at the same level of GAAP compliance as were required for the filings. And so that immediately put us into a problem of being not able to file our reports. So then we were off, not delisted, but ceased trading until we could get the audits completed for their side and all that. So again, it's not I'm not whining about it as much as it's just the complexity of that. And if you're talking about rolling up cannabis companies, we all know that depending on the size and the capital allocation that they put toward financial reporting, some are going to be better than others. And if you didn't do the simplest thing, like make sure you did a audit of everything at year end that was a physical count and documented independently, you can't actually produce audited financials until you do that. And a lot of cannabis companies don't do that, right? Because they didn't have to think about doing that. So, all that to say, you just fight through it and, hopefully we'll find some relief in the future if we do get some type of banking relief, safer, whatever is on the horizon, to where, hopefully we can bring some of these companies back to the U.S. and have U.S. listed companies and, maybe have more access to capital that at a cheaper cost that allows us to afford what we need to do to operate in that public environment.
Totally. Yep, makes sense. So let's talk about the edibles landscape today. What is your perspective in terms of is edibles, going to be a major, if not the major form factor going forward? How are you seeing consumer trends in particular relative to the other big categories of vape and flower?
Sure. Yeah, great question. I think back in the, call it, I don't know, let's say 5 or 6 years ago, if we looked at sort of edibles as a percentage of total revenue, down in the 10 or 15%, maybe. Today, edibles are up in the 25%, and, in some cases closer to 30% of the total revenue split. You see flower, which was, the dominant, starting to drop, still in that maybe 30-35% if you had pre-rolls in it. And then concentrates make up the balance, which is going to be concentrates, but also mainly vapes. And then obviously you got topicals, which is a relatively small number. Not, and we do a lot of topicals, but consumers' consumption of topicals isn't as fast, right, as it is a bag of gummies. That's gone in a weekend, where a balm or a salve, takes a month. So I think that's indicative of the continued normalization of the industry, in my opinion. People that typically weren't consumers of cannabis are now finding opportunities to engage. They're finding, high quality, low dose products. They're finding entourage effects products with other cannabinoids that are providing different levels of relief or wellness. And the stigma continues to go away. And I think we as an industry continue to do better and better about making the retail experience more inviting, or, slowly being able to bring things like delivery services. So, that mom that can't get away from her kids during the day because she's got to take care of them can call and have, gummies or a drink delivered to her, so that she doesn't have to worry about going off and going to the dispensary. So I think we're just making it more available and accessible. And I believe, sorry for my long-winded answer, but I believe that'll continue to rise edibles as an important category.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. And in your response, you got right on to my next question, which was around, what are some kind of exciting subcategories that you're seeing emerge? And, you hit on two of the ones that I was going to mention, one being low dose edibles, another being full spectrum edibles. We've seen Dialed In doing some really exciting stuff here in Colorado. And then I'd also add to that list infused pre-rolls, which have been flying off the shelf. So it seems like there's more and more kind of sub-targeting of different demographics and consumption patterns, et cetera. But would just love to get your thoughts on how you're seeing kind of SKU categories develop.
Yeah, I think spot on. I'm not sure I could say anything more intelligent than what you just laid out. I am, you know, I do a few things now, one of which is I'm doing a turnaround, a consulting turnaround job right now with a fairly well-known dispensary brand here in Colorado. And as I've looked at their numbers and looked at trying to drive specialization in the categories to kind of meet the consumer where they are when they're coming to us, we are seeing a proliferation of infused pre-rolls, which is really interesting, much more than we've seen in the past. Low dose products are also appealing to a different demographic that's causing them to come in. It's not just typically the 25-year-old, ski instructor that just loves to, to rip a joint or, pack a bowl, so to speak, and smoke flower, which is always going to continue to be in that, I think, a third of the category. But, things that are more approachable, whether gummies or, one of my favorite products, not to shout out a brand that's not my own, but Joy Bombs. They're little, kind of look like a little candy Skittle. They're 2 milligrams. I subscribe to the theory it's easier to add than subtract. So if I can start low and then add incrementally, I'm probably in a much better place than if I start high. So we're definitely seeing that specialization and seeing that appealing to a different demographic. So that just creates a total addressable market that's larger than it was 5 years ago.
Yeah, absolutely. And you mentioned your involvement in the turnaround here in Colorado. In addition to your board seat at Bellrock, know that you're highly involved in a number of different ways in the industry. So I'd love to just kind of talk about what else you're working on these days.
Yeah, thank you for that. I guess a passion of mine is an organization called Colorado Leads, and we're now 7 years old. It's a trade coalition or industry coalition that focuses almost exclusively on promoting the business of cannabis in Colorado. We do deal with regulatory issues, and in fact, we just ran in conjunction with our good friends over at MIG, a industry streamlining bill, and it's really the first of probably a 3 or 5 year process of taking rules and regulations that have been put in place since Amendment 64 and looking for where there's redundancy, looking for where we can, take the suspenders off and just leave the belt on, as long as we're not impacting public safety or the quality of the product. So we do run legislation. We do get very involved in political campaigns to ensure that we're working with folks that are friendly to the industry, if you will. But Colorado Leads, just as a quick backstory, it was started by 6 or 7 of us, and a few of the OGs as well. Andy Williams with Medicine Man, and John Lord, Live Well, myself, Christian Cederberg, who needs no introduction to anybody, Josh Hanfling, who's a good friend and also a lobbyist in town with Seawald Hanfling. We were all sitting around a table at the Capitol Grill, and we were sort of bemoaning the fact that, our trade associations were playing at a very tactical level, and we didn't have, and part of that was just capital and other ability to focus. We weren't playing at a higher level. We weren't playing at, who's getting elected governor or attorney general or even senator, et cetera. So we all decided to create an organization, and we didn't have the name Colorado Leads at the time. But I said, this was great. I got to go to the restroom. And I walked out, went to the restroom. And when I came back, all of those guys stood up and said, congratulations, you're the new president of our new organization. So be careful. Don't go to the bathroom when a decision is being made. So anyway, 7 years later, I would say that we're, leading industry coalition, trade association, impacted a lot of legislation, impacted a lot of positive decisions at the ballot in the various votes in November's. Organization of about 50 folks. The board is made up entirely of CEOs or founders, so decision maker folks, and we just continue to push. Really, our mantra is we want to be treated like any other industry in the state of Colorado. And that's really how we execute our legislative policy. And, I'm just proud to be part of that organization and help lead it.
Amazing. Do you have any perspective on the rescheduling news that's been going on this year and, your outlook for that?
I guess, my opinion, and I guess $4.25 right now could get you a latte at Starbucks. But, I do think it's going to happen. I think that there's a lot of tailwind for this. I do fear that the prohibitionists are really gearing up for a fight, and that fight will potentially delay the implementation of this. I think they would be better served trying to meet us somewhere in the middle as opposed to trying to kill it, because this horse is totally out of the barn. And you're going to get to a point, Jordan, where the sheer volume of the voting public is so skewed to the legalization of cannabis that there isn't going to be any negotiation with the other side. Right now, as a matter of fact, Colorado Leads has commissioned the writing of a public comment on rescheduling, but we're taking it at the focus of what is the impact of the elimination of 280E at the small business level in cannabis. We all know there's medicinal benefits, and we all know, some of the other positive effects that this would provide, and clearly 280E. But from our purview and our members, we can go out and survey them and say, how many more people would you be able to hire? What other things would you be able to do to promote and improve your business if you didn't have this tax burden overhang? So we'll be submitting those public comments, in the next couple of weeks, I believe.
Wow. Well, that's exciting. We just submitted our public comment a couple of weeks ago. So, hopefully collectively we can get the government to finally make some positive momentum here, at least at the federal level, and, normalize the tax structure so that cannabis can finally compete effectively against the black market, which is really driving, a lot of the consternations we've seen in the industry to date.
100%. And when all that happens, you know better than I, but we will have access to capital open again, and it'll be at better rates because some of the risk will be off in that scenario. So I'm eager for that day as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And, we're seeing it already, in bits and drabs. I think, to your point, once rescheduling's fully in the books, we've gotten past the litigation period, then I think the capital is really going to start to flow. But even I like to highlight, the developments in Trulieve's debt, right? I mean, it was trading at, I want to say around 68% less than a year ago. And today it's trading in the high 90s. So I think the sophisticated investors have seen, to your point, how dramatically the cash flow profile of the industry is changing with rescheduling, in addition to the fact that many of these big operators like Trulieve have been able to get cash back from past 280E taxes paid. So I do think that we're seeing the cash flow profile of our industry change in hugely positive ways. And so now it's just on the rest of the market to catch up to that updated reality.
Well, and I look forward to that day because I know you do and your partners at Key do for sure.
Absolutely.
It'll be fun to deploy capital at a reasonable cost and use that capital to help some of these really good operators go to the next level.
100%. Yeah. And then I'm excited too. You talk about, safer banking, hard to say when that'll happen, but I think obviously getting rescheduling done and increases the likelihood dramatically. And then I think, on the heels of that, we would eventually see something like the Climb Act, which would enable these plant touching operators, like you were talking about earlier, to list on major US exchanges, which, I think again is just going to be a step change for the industry, because not only does that allow folks to move up from the CSE and the TSX today, but it also enables all of these publicly listed alcohol, tobacco, pharma, CPG companies to start investing in and acquiring cannabis businesses. Because as you know, today, if they did that, they'd be kicked off the exchanges.
Right. Yeah, it's funny you say that, going all the way back to the beginning of our conversation when Trip and I started the company, being a little bit naive, um, or at least maybe optimistic. Naive is a bad word. We had a whiteboard in our office and we had three boxes on it. It was pharma, alcohol, and tobacco. And we would just sit there and talk to each other about which one of those boxes was going to walk into our door first with a big bag of money and offer to buy us. Well, here we are 16 years later, and they haven't come into the door yet. But that was our premise all the way back then. And I agree with you, that will happen at some point when normalization occurs.
Yeah. Well, Chuck, this has been such a fun conversation. Really appreciate you taking the time to join us on Cannabis Unlocked today.
Well, Jordan, thank you again. It's an honor with all the folks that I know that you have interviewed in the past. I'm just honored to be part of that. So thank you so much.
Absolutely. We're honored to have you.
Well, good. Well, look, you have a great day, and keep doing what you do, man.
Absolutely. Same to you, Chuck.
All right. Thank you.
Thanks so much.